Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the show. Around the nation right here, Wiki Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you on this Monday afternoon. So this weekend was a really hard, really tough weekend for a lot of people. So first and foremost, obviously I want to give my condolences to everybody who's lost family or friends or, from both Dayton and El Paso. Horrific attacks that happened over the weekend. We're going to go into detail in some of the stories. We'll talk about the fallout from that, of course. We have, who the president and Republicans are blaming for this attack. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about how dumb our president is when it comes to whether or not he will read anything that's in the teleprompter. Spoiler alert, he will. So we've got that. Then we've got some pushback from AOC, of course, from all the blame that Republicans are putting on video games, especially. So we're going to talk about that. Then, I know I'm doing a breakdown right now, but just to let you know, we could go more in depth about all the stuff that's going on about the shooting that happened. Unfortunately, if I did that, the entire show would be demonetized. Every single video clip demonetized. So I've got half the show that we're going to talk about, half the topics that are going to be demonetized straight off the bat. So that's how YouTube is right now. But these stories are really, really important to share, are really important to talk about. So that's why we're talking about them. But don't worry, we've also got some other stuff that's not shooting related, which is probably a good thing. We also have a ridiculous lie from President Trump about a helicopter helicopter crash that he survived. So we've got that ridiculous story. Then we have the president apparently caught selling condos to people that he would probably not want to be associated with at this point. So, we're not going to give it all away, but we're going to talk about it. And then, of course, we have Trump's plan to allow Americans to buy drugs from Canada, getting roundly mocked by Canadians. Yeah, I thought they would be too nice to do that, but we'll talk about that. So that's a little bit of fun and policy related as well. So that's the show. If you're wondering what the hell this thing is, it's my temporary pop filter. There have been a lot of suggestions to remove the windscreen, and because it was, I guess, making it a little unclear. I didn't notice anything wrong with the sound, but they suggested I get a non-obstructive pop filter. So I'm doing this, and then you wouldn't believe it, right? So. Any of you who watch Kyle Kalinski's videos, you'll notice that he's got this little thing on the end, right? This little mini pop filter. So I looked that up. It's $75. I kid you not. $75 for just that little thing. I was like, man, you've got to be kidding. But I ended up having to buy it because nobody else sells anything like that, and this thing's kind of junky. So the things that we do, right? $75. It's amazing. All right, before I get into the rest of the show, start the show, I got a super chat here from Coffee Crow, who has some really, really good news. Congratulations on your marriage, your recent nuptials. So congratulations, you have entered into a holy union. And into the club with the rest of us married folks. So, hey, congratulations. That's awesome. And then also had a comment here who said, people have always been violent. What video games do you suppose people were playing during the Crusades? That's a good question. In fact, there's a ridiculous statement here from a Republican lieutenant governor or Republican politician talking about, we've always had guns and we've always had evil. What's changed? No, we haven't always had guns, but we've always had violence. And so maybe it's not related to... we've had violence since the caveman days, since a guy would take a club and hit another dude over the head with it. But blame the video games, please. Blame the movies and the music. Right. No, humanity. Men have always been violent. And that's, of course, its own big sociological problem. But it's not related to the video games, that's for sure. But anyway, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start out with our dumb president. Okay. So that needs no other introduction. President Trump knows words. In fact, he has the best words. During a speech on the gun violence that happened over the weekend, our very stable genius had offered condolences to the people of Toledo. Only problem is, nothing happened in Toledo. It actually happened in Dayton. Toledo is actually about approximately 150 miles north of Dayton. But Trump, of course, couldn't help but read whatever was written on the teleprompter, which led to some very intense Twitter mockery. I want to share some of those tweets with you just to show you how this was received, these condolences. First, let's go to Translate Trump, who points out that there is a tweet mocking people who use teleprompters. Translate Trump found, "Holy Toledo, there's always a tweet," and this is a tweet from Donald Trump. "Why does Barack Obama always have to rely on teleprompters?" It's a little bit of irony today. But let's get to some other mocking tweets here. Akilah Hughes says, "Hey, if you're in Dayton, just a swift reminder that the President of the United States was golfing when your city had a mass shooting and just referred to the city you live in as Toledo. Just tuck that in your pocket for when it comes time to vote again," which is coming relatively soon, actually. DeRay says, "Trump said Toledo. He didn't even care enough to get the location of the shooting correct. At GOP, y'all continue to enable him." Well, that's the truth. Comedian W. Kamau Bell said instead of saying Dayton, he said Toledo. And he noticed that Trump couldn't stop sniffing. And said, "If we can't impeach the president, can we at least drug test him?" Hey, man, look, that's a legitimate question, right? You want to drug test people on welfare. You might want to drug test the president, who doesn't sleep very much, is very, very erratic, and sniffs all the time. I'm just saying. It might not be the worst thing in the world to do. For his health, of course. For his health. Tom Joseph said, "Trump's speech had a tight camera shot in his head and chest, perhaps to hide his body movements and podium clutching. He slurred as he struggled to read prepared text, saying Texas instead of El Paso, then closing with Toledo. He's a dementia tragedy still occupying the White House." And if that's true, that is really actually very, very sad. Peter Segal says, "First Bowling Green, now Toledo," in reference, of course, to the famous Bowling Green massacre, made famous by, of course, Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president. And all of us, we all remember the horrific tragedy that was in Bowling Green, the massacre. Terrible. Juliet KM says, "We should treat the president that speech as seriously as the president did." Got that one out. Dar says, "Has Trump blamed the press for him saying Toledo yet? Wait a few hours. Eventually it'll come." Rex Hupke says, "Yes, you see it's spelled Dayton, but pronounced Toledo. Very common mistake, apparently, especially in Ohio." And then finally, Jay Railing says, "I have the best brain, I have the best words, I have the winning gene. Also Trump mixes up Dayton and Toledo. He doesn't care, Ohio." Well, and that, of course, is the crux of the issue, right? He doesn't care enough to get it right. Either there's something, and you want to talk about mental health, right? Either he's mentally imbalanced, or he doesn't care. Or he just reads whatever you put in the teleprompter. It doesn't matter. One of those things has to be true. Or, and this is the worst one, maybe they're all true. Yikes. Okay. Now let's get to some substance. And this is bugging me. This thing's way too heavy. Okay. Okay. Now, President Trump is blaming everybody else for the pair of terrible mass shootings that took place over the weekend. So now what happened, of course, is that a gunman had killed 20 people and wounded dozens more in an attack at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. Now, less than a day later, on Sunday, 9 people were killed and more than 2 dozen were injured in a shooting in Dayton, Ohio. Not Toledo. Just letting you know that. It's not Toledo. The El Paso shooter, named Patrick Wood Crucis, specifically targeted a place where there was a high concentration of Hispanic people and had previously written a racist anti-immigrant manifesto prior to the attack, which described fears of a Latino-led invasion. Now, where have we heard that rhetoric before? Well, wait. Now, of course, Trump says, what are you talking about? Invasion? No. It doesn't have anything to do with the rhetoric. In fact, it has to do with social media. It's got to do with the internet. It's got the guns, or not guns, sorry. Anything but the guns. No, don't even talk about that. No, it's not white supremacy, nothing like that. In fact, here's who he went after in his speech. He said, the perils of the internet and social media cannot be ignored and will not be ignored. He then directed social media companies to, quote, develop tools to identify mass shooters before they strike. Well, now, wait a minute here. My question is, why is it Twitter's job to do that? Why is it Facebook's job to profile people and find people that are, going to do a mass shooting, that they think they're going to do a mass shooting? How's that their job? We have something called an FBI, which, by the way, they have already pointed out, and I did this story a few days ago, last week. They said, look, if you're a white supremacist and you believe in some of these conspiracy theories, you are dangerous to this country. You are more likely to perpetrate an attack on fellow Americans. It is those conspiracy theories, things like QAnon, as well as, Pizzagate, as well as people that believe in the replacement theory, which apparently this shooter did. He believed that immigrants were coming over and trying to replace Americans to what end? I don't know. Destroy white people? I don't know. Right? These conspiracy theories, the FBI says, look, they're dangerous. This is the biggest danger facing this country is white right-wing terrorism that is, prefaced on the belief in these conspiracy theories. So maybe we need to focus on doing something like that. Now, the Trump administration says, what? No, Muslims. There were no Muslims in these attacks. These were both white kids, young white males that are right-wing. One was a fan of yours. And the other, I believe, was somebody who was bullied, whatever, maybe possibly an incel, I don't know. So there are some significant issues here that he is not addressing when he attacks social media. Now, here's the thing. He also continued by claiming that we live in a culture that glorifies violence. Oh, no, but glorifies violence. Oh, like when the president retweets a GIF of him body slamming CNN or somebody with the CNN logo on their head. Or how about a more real instance, right? Because, of course, you could make the argument, well, that's wrestling, whatever. Well, do you guys remember Greg Gianforte? He was somebody who won an election in Montana. Right before he won his election, he body slammed a reporter. You know what Donald Trump said to that? Oh, it's my kind of guy. My kind of guy. Oh, no, glorifying violence. How? No, this culture glorifies violence. Well, yeah, you glorify violence. But then, of course, he ignores all that and says, you know what the real problem here, or one of the real problems is, along with this, all the other stuff we mentioned in the video games, fake news. It's fake news media's fault. He said, quote, fake news has contributed greatly to the anger and rage that has built up over many years. News coverage has got to start being fair, balanced, and unbiased, or these terrible problems will only get worse. The fake news media. Totally biased coverage against me, by the way. And he is always the victim of this supposed super unfair media coverage, right? They're mean to me. That's why there are shootings. Well, I guess in a way that he's right, because what President Trump is doing is saying, oh, to his fans, some of which are very well armed, some of which are unhinged, and some of which are just violent white supremacists, he's saying, well, these guys are the worst. They're the enemies. They're trying to take me down. They're trying to destroy us. Maybe somebody ought to do something about that. And you know what they call that? They call that stochastic terrorism. But hey, look, he's not wrong when he says fake news does contribute to the problem. I totally agree. Which is why you can point a finger at Fox News and right-wing media. Look, you've got people on Fox News like Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson. They're warning and giving legitimacy to the so-called white replacement conspiracy theory, right? That white people will be replaced by minorities, and they even call it white genocide. That is a massive white supremacist talking point. They talk about it on Fox News all the time. And you have Donald Trump that retweets these hosts. He even took Tucker Carlson along with him to a trip. I mean, how much of a symbiotically, gross relationship do they have? So he legitimizes these talking points, this network and these hosts. And why? It's because I've said it before. He's the Fox News president. He is what happens when you take a regular viewer who is engrossed in Fox News and you put him in a position of power. This is what happens. So then he goes and also blames mental health. He said, quote, mental illness and hatred pulled the trigger, not the gun. Interesting how he talks about triggers then, right? So now on Sunday, he also said this, quote, this is also a mental illness problem. If you look at both of these cases, this is mental illness. These are people that are very, very seriously mentally ill. So a lot of things are happening. A lot of things are happening right now. No, really? A lot of things are happening right now? Really? But of course, that's just me nitpicking about that, because that's just nonsense filler that you get from Donald Trump and his gigantic word salads, right? But the issue is, he says, well, it's mental illness. It's got to be mental illness. So is it? Well, let's take a look. In the document, the suspect in El Paso had referred to Hispanic people as, quote, invaders, and had used a rhetoric that we had heard at Trump rallies before of send them back. Now, of course, the crowd at one of Donald Trump's recent rallies, said send her back in response to Ilhan Omar, who's a Somali refugee, right, who is now an American citizen and a congresswoman. Send her back. Well, in this case, they're saying send them back. And there's also been talk about him saying that the entire squad, people like AOC, should also be sent back to their countries. In fact, he told them, why don't you go fix the countries you came from? 3 of them are American citizens. All of them are American citizens. 3 here were born here in this country. They're American as anybody else, but you don't see it that way because, oh, well, they're brown, or they're black, or they're Somali, or they're Muslim. You can't possibly be a good American if you're any one of those. That's the mindset of people like Donald Trump. But back to the mental illness part of that. So is believing in a invasion from Latinos and being virulently racist, is that a mental illness issue? Unless you're considering racism to be mental illness, which I guess you could make an argument for, that would mean that there's a lot of people in the Republican Party, in the Republican base, that are literally mentally ill under that definition. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So now here's the other thing. He says he wants background check legislation, right? In fact, in a tweet, he tweeted out earlier, and this is going to irritate you even more. He said, Republicans and Democrats must come together and get a strong background checks, perhaps marrying this legislation with desperately needed immigration reform. We must have something good, if not great, come out of these two tragic events. Now, Republicans always talk about politicizing a tragedy. That right there would be the definition. But hey, you know what? If you want something strong on background checks, great news. House has already passed 2 pieces of legislation, 2 bills, that would do enhanced background checks. Now, one of them, of course, involved doing background checks for private sellers, the so-called gun show loophole, right? So people who are private sellers are not, specifically, don't necessarily have to do a background check in order to make a gun sale, which, of course, all non-private dealers do have to do these background checks. So it's kind of a way to get through that and how some people who aren't supposed to have a gun actually end up getting a gun, right? So now what was Trump's response to this? Well, to these 2 pieces of legislation, President Trump did not welcome this and instead threatened a presidential veto. So why tweet this out then? If he's already said, I'm against this legislation, and Republicans are against this legislation because they think, oh no, you're going to hurt actual people who believe in the Second Amendment who aren't actual criminals. I don't see how anybody who isn't who's actually one of those so-called good gun owners, how are they affected at all by background checks? Maybe they have to wait a couple of days in order to get their gun instead of getting their gun right now. Well, why the hurry? Look, I get waiting for a package to come, right? Like, I sit by the door and I'm like, come on, UPS or FedEx or whatever. Like, I want my stuff. But it's not because, it's not the same as a gun, right? Yes, you might want your gun faster, but why is that? I'm kind of curious as to why people need guns right this second, instead of being able to wait for a background check that it's going to come out clean. But here's the thing. Why is he tweeting this out? Why is he making this suggestion, right? Oh, we'll do, background checks. We'll do something about guns if you give me what I want on immigration. Well, it's because he's using a tragedy to get what he wants. Hey, I might get money from my wall, or I might get whatever I want for immigration if I give the Democrats background checks. This is gross. He's a disgusting person. And that's the problem here, right? Now, here's the thing. Look, all the stuff that he's been talking about is nothing but distractions. They're talking points, and they don't actually address the real issues of white supremacy and easy access to weapons. White supremacy and guns. That's what was behind these attacks. Donald Trump and his rhetoric and Fox News fed into this. And so that's the problem, right? I mean, the Dayton shooter had a 100-round drum. Perfectly legal for him to buy. That means he could sit there and shoot and shoot and shoot as fast as he could. That is a far cry from the single-shot rifle that the founding fathers envisioned. Far from it. So we do need to do something about this high-powered weaponry with, endless magazines or near endless magazines where you can do a ton of damage. By the way, the Dayton shooter was killed within seconds, right? He still managed to kill 9 people and injure over 20 in the blink of an eye. So that's the problem that we face, and we need to do something about it. So let's actually talk about the real issues. Let's talk about the fomenting white supremacy in this country. Let's talk about access to, high-powered weaponry and in huge, large magazines. Let's talk about those issues and actually do something about it. Because if you're not, and if you're only using this in order to get something that you want and literally politicizing a tragedy, well, then you're a super gross person. And I think we've figured out what side Donald Trump's on and what kind of person he is. Okay. So let's talk video games.
We must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately.
So that was President Trump, again, trotting out the big lie that video games are to blame for violence. Now, this is in response, of course, to a white supremacist fan of Donald Trump who killed lots of people, 20 people in El Paso. Now, Trump also blamed the internet for radicalizing those who conduct these violent attacks. So now, as a gamer, I've got a lot to say about this, right? As somebody who's played some of the most violent, over-the-top video games, I have personally have not considered going on a rampage. Maybe I'm doing this whole thing wrong. I don't know. maybe I'm a bad gamer, but I've never considered going and killing anybody or shooting anybody, etc. Right? And look, I just recently bought Mortal Kombat 11. Let me tell you, some of those fatalities, they actually do kind of make me cringe. But maybe that's because I'm old now. But again, I never considered hurting anybody watching those. You know why? It's because it's not the video games. It's not the movies. It's not the internet. No, the only thing about the internet is that it has made it easier for people who are, have a like mind to actually come together. People like the white supremacists in Charlottesville, for example. So that's a problem, right? So now, of course, on that, Trump said there are very good people on both sides. So who knows, right? But look, here's the fact about video games. No connection has ever been meaningfully established between violent video games and violent behavior. None. No credible study. In February, for example, a study found that there was no evidence that those who play violent video games are no more prone to real-world aggressive behavior than their peers, and that the link between the two has been overstated. In fact, lead researcher Professor Andrew, I'm not going to be able to say this guy's name, director of research at the Oxford Internet Institute, who conducted one of the most comprehensive studies yet undertaken, said this, quote, "The idea that violent video games drive real-world aggression is a popular one, but it hasn't tested very well over time." That entire narrative is a false narrative. It's an absolute lie, but it has been taken on by members of the Republican Party who are funded not by video game companies, but by gun manufacturers and the NRA. So let me give you some examples of what some of these Republicans are saying after the shooting. Watch.
And I look at this evil act, and let's condemn it for what it is. Evil. And I say, how long are we going to let, for example, and ignore at the federal level particularly, where they can do something about the video game industry? In this manifesto that we believe is from the shooter, this manifesto, he talks about living out his super soldier fantasy on Call of Duty. We know that the video game industry is bigger than the movie industry and the music industry combined. And there have been studies that say it impacts people and studies that says it does not. But I look at the common denominators as a 60-some-year-old father and grandfather myself. What's changed in this country? We've always had guns. We've always had evil. But what's changed where we see this rash of shooting? And I see a video game industry that teaches young people to kill.
We've always had guns. We've always had evil. What's changed? What's changed? Well, for one, we haven't always had guns. I mean, sure, America has always had guns, but the world's always had weapons. And the world has been fairly violent. Now, interestingly enough, we're actually in one of the least violent times in the entire world. But how can that be? We have video games. We have violent video games. We have violent movies, and we have rap music. How can that be that we're living in one of the most peaceful times worldwide in the history of the world? I guess with the exception of the United States, that has a huge problem with gun violence. Because, think about it. Japan and all these other countries, right, they all have video games. They all have movies. They all have music, right? They all have mental health issues. Every country in the world. But yet nobody else seems to have this gun problem that we have. I wonder what the common factor is. I wonder. Maybe you should look into that, Dan Patrick. But no. Anything except for the guns. Anything except for white supremacy. Let's not talk about any of those things. Let's not talk about Donald Trump's rhetoric, which is really important. Let's not talk about any of that. Now, he's not the only one. Of course, there are more Republicans. So let's go to House Leader Kevin McCarthy. Or I'm sorry, House Republican Kevin McCarthy. Take a look.
But the idea of these video games to dehumanize individuals, to have a game of shooting individuals and others, I've always felt that is a problem for future generations and others. We've watched from studies shown before of what it does to individuals. When you look at these photos of how it took place, you can see the actions within video games and others. But what I'd like to do is make sure just get all the facts.
Oh, you want to get all the facts? Well, you're not doing very good. You're not starting out very well, right? Because you don't have any of the facts. For one, again, there are no credible studies that link video games and violence. It is a lie. It is a ridiculous talking point, and it is used, of course, to try to prevent any discussion on gun control. By the way, those of you who scream, mental health, it's all mental health. Okay, well, Republicans, you want to do something about that? You want to actually, expand funding for mental health, expand access to mental health through, for example, a single-payer healthcare system? Now, there's a lot of Republican voters that would love that, but Republican politicians like, no, don't talk about healthcare either. Let's not talk about single-payer healthcare. No, let's not talk about guns. No, let's not talk about Donald Trump and his racist rhetoric. No, can't talk about any of that. No, let's go after the video games. Let's go after the media. Let's go after social media, right? Let's go after everything else. Let's go after, and there's some, there was another Republican, and I forget her name, unsurprisingly, she's Southern Republican, and she decided to blame gay marriage and Obama. Oh no, it's the deterioration of the family. It's lack of prayer in schools. It's all of that stuff, but can't talk about anything that actually might have caused the problem. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, come on, man. The whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. We're not talking about the real issues. Now, AOC, by the way, had a response to this, right? And so she tweeted this out. She said, quote, video games aren't causing mass shootings. White supremacy is. Sadly, the GOP refused to acknowledge that because their strategy relies on rallying a white supremacist base. That's why the president hosts stadiums of people chanting, send her back, and targets Congress members of color. Now, look, that is fairly clear, right? White supremacy, especially when it came to the El Paso shooter, was the main driver. Again, this is somebody who posted a manifesto that said, we're being invaded by the Latinos. Echoing Donald Trump's rhetoric about invasion. And look, it's very, very, very clear, right? And look, this is based on, again, Trump's rhetoric because of, let me give you an example, right? He's called immigration and invasion, and actually his own campaign has put out over 2,200 Facebook ads mentioning the word invasion. That's since May of 2018. All these Facebook ads that say, there's an invasion at the border, there's an invasion at the border, we got to do something on the border, there's an invasion. And then somebody like this says, well, it's their invasion, I got to do something about it. And then he grabs a gun and some body armor, and he goes and does something about it. This is stochastic terrorism. Now, AOC also mentioned that in one of her tweets. She said using the words invasion, infestation with respect to a specific targeted group of people, implying that they are vermin. This is the language of white supremacy, and it goes all the way to the top. It's not a matter of political stances. This is stoking hatred and endangering the country. So, is it the video games? No, it's pretty clear what this is about. This is white supremacy, and, of course, to an extent, also easy access to high-powered weaponry, which allows them to carry out their white supremacist attacks. Now, if you benefit from white supremacy through votes, then I'm guessing that it's not in your best interest to blame white supremacy. It's your best interest to blame something else. Video games is the newest scapegoat. Well, maybe not the newest scapegoat, because they've been blaming video games since like the 90s, but it takes its place just like they blamed music and movies before it. So this is nothing new. This is another ridiculous BS attack to try to avoid talking about the real issues in this country. Okay. I'm going to take a break. A couple minutes. We'll come back with other stories, non-terror shooting related stories, including the time that the president lied about surviving a helicopter crash. I know, weird, but we'll do that. We'll come right back. Around the Nation. Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here. PYT Nation, Jeff Waller here with you. Okay, so there's so much discussion, so many comments going on in our chat room here. So, I mean, it's awesome. It's good to see a lot of the discussion here. Before I get into it, please like and share the stream. Very, very important that you do so. I see there's a lot of people here today, more so than normal, so that's awesome. Broke 200 pretty easily. And that's really good for the live stream. So please like and share. Keep that going. All right. So I don't know if I want to read here too many of these comments. Let's just go. Jeanette Vallona says, who's a member, Trump is a habitual liar. It's like a second nature, the air that we breathe. How can anyone in his rallies, thinks what he says is true and the rest of the world, it's crazy. Okay, so I had a hard time reading that. But trying to stay close to the mic, guys. Okay, let's see. Let me do one more member comment here. Let's see. I want to find a really good one. There's a lot of good ones. Let's see. Okay. Oh, non-member comment here from Mac Daddy says Trump got rid of the law that stopped people with mental illness from getting guns. There's also, I think, a Republican that said blind people should be able to have guns too. Blind people. Look, obviously I've got nothing against blind people, but they probably shouldn't have guns. They're blind. Oh no, being blind, that shouldn't stop you from being able to exercise your Second Amendment right. You just might want to think about that for a second. I mean, right. Sarge Tech said Trump has blood on his tiny hands. His rallies are filled with hateful language towards immigrants and people of color. It's absolutely true. So it's a great comment there. All right, so now let's get to more stories here. All right. Something quick. A former employee of the Trump organization is calling out the president for lying about something actually pretty silly. I know, big shocker, right, that the president actually lied about something. This is Barbara Rez. There is a video clip for this, but I don't have it because copyright issues or potential copyright issues, anytime using any sort of clip from MSNBC, they try to shut down your channel or they try to give you a copyright strike. So I'm not even going to try to attempt to get that video. So I'm just going to read it for you guys. Now, this was last week. Barbara Rez was on Ari Melber's show. That's MSNBC, right? And so Rez was talking to Melber, and they got in the conversation of a helicopter crash that happened in 1989. Apparently, 3 Trump casino executives and 2 crew members were killed in a disaster returning to Atlantic City from promoting a boxing match in New York City when the aircraft went down. Now, what does this have to do with Donald Trump? Well, apparently he lied about. He lied about surviving the crash. She said, sources said Trump himself was scheduled to be on the flight, but decided at the last minute he was too busy to leave New York. The UPI Newswire reported at the time. Now, what Rez says is that that's not what happened. Quote, that was a total lie promoted by Trump. What a weird thing to lie about. She said, quote, it wasn't very long after the crash that he was putting out the word that he was supposed to be on that plane or that helicopter. Maybe he couldn't decide which it was or which sounded better. Kind of like with the, what foot the bone spur was in. Or maybe both. He doesn't remember. And that he didn't go at the last minute. He got pulled off the plane. In other words, she said he would be dead by now if that didn't happen. Now, again, why would you lie about that? That's weird. That doesn't make any sense. Unless, of course, you know Donald Trump. And, of course, Rez does. In fact, she said, quote, Trump was simply making himself part of the story. A very important story, and undermining the fact that 3 people had died. Now, she uses this in relation because they were also talking about how he claimed that he was involved in helping people during 9/11, which, of course, he did not. It's a disgusting lie, and one to make him apparently look better, right? Or somehow insert himself in the story. The problem, and of course, exploiting it, as she had mentioned. But that's all he does. And so when you have that context, you realize that he has a pathological need to lie about things, to insert himself into stories where he actually had, wasn't involved at all. did nothing. And it's because, again, he can't help himself. He is the guy that no matter what the topic is, he somehow has to make it about himself. I mean, this helicopter thing was something that was debunked in at least 3 separate biographies, and yet, to this day, he continues to lie, and he doubles down. It's really amazing how much he gets away with this constant lying, even by the media, who doesn't necessarily point out that, hey, Trump lied about this, and especially his supporters. They take everything that he says as true. I don't know how you can do that. I don't know how you can't just look and say, oh, turns out, no, he wasn't actually involved. Or when somebody points out and says, actually, that's not what happened. Oh, you don't know anything, libtard. You're just listening to the fake news media. No, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true. He didn't actually do this. And the reason that I point this out is because this is who Donald Trump is. This is another fabrication to make him the center of attention. Because who Donald Trump is somebody that has to have that. And he will get it no matter what. Okay. Moving on. Now, if it's one thing President Trump hates most, it's socialism, and especially the socialist hellscape that is Venezuela. Unless, of course, you're Venezuelan and you're buying one of his condos. Now, this is according to a report in Politico, which is fairly interesting, came out yesterday. At least half a dozen Venezuelans linked to either Maduro or his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, ended up purchasing Trump condos in New York City and South Florida prior to Trump becoming president of the United States. This is according to property records, right? Several of the individuals, by the way, had faced serious allegations of, and even pleaded guilty to financial fraud in Venezuela, the type of financial fraud, of course, that President Trump says he's combating. Now, this has experts in financial fraud saying, hey, wait a minute. We looked at these records, and these records say something really strange. They noted that some of these purchases were made above market value, fully in cash, or using shell companies to obscure their identities, all potential signs of money laundering. Oops. Well, that's rather strange. Now, that's something I didn't expect to see. Donald Trump selling condos to corrupt Venezuelan officials. Apparently, he's not too good for their socialist money. And actually, you know what? It totally makes sense. Now, Trump himself did not do anything criminal under U.S. law, and that's really important. But you kind of have to think, now, wait a minute. Why are people wanting to pay way above market value for these condos? And is that an example of money laundering? I don't know. See, Donald Trump never thought about any of that, but he gladly took their money. So here's some irony about this, right? So now during a speech back in Miami in February, he said this, quote, millions of Venezuelans are starving and suffering, while a small handful at the top of the Maduro regime plunder the nation into poverty and into death. We know who they are, and we know where they keep the billions of dollars they have stolen. Well, I mean, he's right about one thing. He does know where some of that money went to, right into his pocket. Oops. Is it any wonder why he has not released his tax returns? Might be something to look into. Okay, so there's more. Now, President Trump has made regime change in Venezuela a top goal. Now, that's something that I'm personally against. That's not our business. We shouldn't be doing regime change wars. But what's funny about this is that he didn't seem to have a problem with Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro before he became president. Or at least he had no problem taking their money. As Politico explains, prior to Trump becoming president, his sprawling real estate ventures sold properties to numerous wealthy Venezuelans with government connections. Now, this is according to an examination of property records, court documents, and Spanish-language media reports compiled by the advocacy group American Bridge 21st Century. And although the Trump organization only owned the New York properties, it licensed its brand to all the Florida developments. The company was helped by all the condo sales. It also received a licensing fee for at least 2 of these Venezuelan purchases because they were the original sale of the property. So now, I said, Donald Trump did not break any laws in America. Here's what's messed up. In the United States, unlike in other countries, real estate professionals are exempt from adopting anti-money laundering programs that could identify suspicious buyers. The result, according to Elise Bean, former staff director of a Senate subcommittee that investigated money laundering, quote, is that real estate agents have no legal obligation to screen their clients for signs of money laundering, so they don't. So all Donald Trump has to do, even if it's obvious money laundering, he says, what? I don't see anything, and then he puts the money straight into his pocket. So let me give you a couple of details about his buyers, right? So look, one of them was Morris Baracha. He's a businessman, has ties with the Venezuelan government, as most of these people you're going to see do. He was actually a former advisor to one of Chavez's top deputies, Finance Minister Rafael Asaya. Now, Baracha is one of the wealthiest people in Venezuela, with significant and uncommon access to the Venezuelan government officials. So now he was sued, a lawsuit that accused him of receiving money as part of a $500 million Ponzi scheme. So, that's fun. He also bribed, allegedly, an official with a Venezuela state-owned oil company. Now, that lawsuit eventually settled, and Baracha has never been convicted of a crime. Now, he bought 3 Trump condos in New York and Florida, according to property records. Now, okay, look, you want to go and buy Trump condos. Well, already I'm going to be like, what are you doing? But that's not illegal in itself, right? So now the thing is that he bought this in 2002 and then sold it for $3 million to a shell company. That shell company he owned. In fact, he was the beneficial owner of that shell company. Baracha also later bought another Trump World Tower unit for $5.2 million in 2007 through another shell company. That shell company listed him as the sole director, and he had purchased a Trump Palace unit on Sunny Isle Beach for $3.6 million. According to the Miami-Dade property appraiser, the lawsuit indicated that both shell companies owned the Trump World Tower units. Baracha also owns the 2 New York properties. That's just one of the guys. There's more. Roberto Rincon, who pleaded guilty in 2016 to bribing officials at Venezuela's state-owned oil company, also had a Trump condo in Florida. A Delaware shell company, which is linked to Rincon through renovation permits and property tax records, paid $1.7 million in August 2011 for a condo in Trump Tower 3. So that's Trump Tower 3. He bought this condo, and it was well above the $1.3 million the apartment was assessed at in 2012. It was actually about $1.7 million. That's how much it was worth, according to information available online and the Miami-Dade property appraiser. Here's another guy, Ronald Sanchez, brother of Venezuela's National Superintendent of Securities under Chavez, bought a Trump condo in Florida, a horse racing stable he owned called Rontos Racing Stable, paid $625,000 in July of 2011 for a condo in Trump Tower 3 in Sunny Isles Beach in Florida. All of these purchases, by the way, there were no deeds. It was just, or no mortgage sales. It was cash. Pure cash, right? And way above the listing price. There's plenty more, right? There's a lot of officials that were part of Venezuela's government that ended up buying Trump condos and likely used them to launder money. So he made a lot of money off these guys, and at the same time, slamming Venezuela. He's still making money, by the way, off doing this corruption. Because, look, he hasn't divested from his businesses, so he still ends up getting money from whatever condo sales. And this is the same kind of corruption that he says the Venezuelan government is doing. And that's the hypocrisy. And so, look, when it comes to Donald Trump, it's pretty clear. And this is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to his rampant corruption. There's no low that he won't go if it makes him money. I mean, he also takes money from the Saudis, right? He, sold condos and rents rooms to the Saudis. That helps him. That helps them launder money. He's all for it. Why? Because it goes right into his pocket. He is the king of corruption. And so I love it when people say, "Oh, drain the swamp, drain the swamp." Notice he doesn't say that anymore, right? Because look, he's the king of the swamp. He's the literal swamp monster. It's beyond hilarious that he would say, "Oh no, I'm against corruption. I'm going to fight corruption." How dare that Venezuelan government so corrupt, so corrupt? No, it's projection. He is the swamp because that's who Donald Trump is, and that's how he profits. Okay, one more here. Canadian newspaper is having the last laugh after President Trump announced a proposal to allow Americans to buy cheaper drugs from Canada. Now, look, I'm actually in favor of this plan. Nonetheless, in an editorial in the Globe and Mail, these editors wrote, quote, "All of a sudden, our complex medical regime has become the face-saving solution to a problem plaguing a president seeking re-election, while at the same time being a remedy he would never consider in his own country and which he is happy to mock." So now, again, I support this policy. I think it's at least a Band-Aid. It's something, and it would help reduce drug prices, which here in America are absolutely insane. But it is fun to point out that there is some irony in this position, because he's not willing to set the conditions which would drastically lower drug prices in this country. Now, the editors also note that in the past, Trump has derided Canada as, quote, a socialist failure. And yet they have cheaper drug prices and actually better health care. Ironic, right? But look, again, the plan here, and this plan's been echoed by Senator Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, who was originally against it, now ended up coming for it, being in favor of it, I should say, after huge backlash, would basically allow Americans to buy drugs that were now the interesting part about this is that these drugs are made in America and then shipped to Canada. So we're buying it from Canada, who bought the drugs from America, but at a cheaper price. Because it's cheaper in Canada, because they have government, the single-payer health care, of course, and they also have price controls, right? He'd rather allow Americans to do that than do anything to solve the high drug prices in America. And again, these drugs are made in America. Why don't we do something in America? I don't know. How about we do like Medicare for all? Or allow Medicare for at least to negotiate drug prices for pharmaceutical companies. We got to do something, right? That would actually bring down some of the prices. Which, again, Canada already does both of these things. That's why their drugs are literally cheaper. That's why people are going to Canada. Bernie Sanders just took a bunch of people over the border to go and get insulin. That is much cheaper in this country. Now, in Canada, the government, and this is what they do, they set ceiling prices for new patented drugs and limits the amounts by which that they can rise every year. Again, those are price controls. Now, you ask every right-winger about price controls, they said, oh my God, it's not going to work. It's going to lead to disastrous drug shortages. Everything's going to be terrible and on fire, and everyone will die. Like, literally everyone will die. But wait a minute. If there's a shortage, when you put in price controls, if there's supposed to be a shortage when you do that, then how come Canada doesn't have a shortage? How come Americans are getting drugs from Canada? How come your entire plan hinges on Americans getting drugs from Canada? If their system is so horrible that leads to shortages, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. No, the only reason that there would be a shortage is if the company decides they don't want to make it anymore. Now, I guess there are certain reasons oh, it's too expensive, right? Too expensive to make. We can't have a decent profit margin. Look, I understand that, right? The thing is that most of these medications that they charge outrageous prices for are actually made incredibly cheaply. Insulin, for example, costs between $2 and $5 to make per vial. $2 to $5. Now, it's sold for several times more. And even if you were to reduce the price by quite a bit, they would still end up making a decent profit, enough for them to continue making it. So, and here's the kicker, by the way, right? So, a lot of these companies that sell these drugs, they never even paid for any of the research for that. In fact, a lot of taxpayer money goes into research for these drugs that is then privatized and sold for a profit. Why is it that a private company is allowed to profit off drugs that we helped create, we paid for through our taxes? Why is that? They go and they take something that was publicly created, publicly paid for and researched, and then turn around and price gouge us for it. That's outrageous. That is outrageous. But this is what happens in America. This is what happens when you have a system built on unchecked greed. In no other country does this actually happen. Why? It's because they actually have a government that works for them. Price controls on certain things. Programs like single-payer health care and a government not captured by special interests. That's what they have. That's what we need. Now, one more bit of irony here. Now, the editors also noticed that, quote, they wrote that the president is encouraging at least one group of people to cross a country's southern border in search of a better life. Nothing gets by these guys. I mean, what more can you say about that one? All right. That's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for going around the nation with me. Please like and share the stream. Subscribe. Consider becoming a patron if you like what you see, if you want us to continue to do content. Patreon.com/TYTNation or become a channel member. Hit the join button. Thank you guys. Love you. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. We'll see you guys tomorrow.